Reward and punishment. Learning objectives. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my friends. How are you all? Today we will learn about reward and punishment. Let's get started. We know, my friends, that Allah Almighty is just, wise, and powerful. He is the owner of sovereignty. Allah Almighty created all His servants and commanded them to obey Him and follow His messengers. Peace be upon them. Allah Almighty has given the obedient believers a reward for their obedience. Allah Almighty has also designated punishment for the disobedient, ones who turn away from His worship. This is a consequence of their disobedience. Allah Almighty said in the Holy Qur'an, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Is there any reward for goodness except goodness? Allah Almighty said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The reward of an evil deed is its equivalent. The concept of reward and punishment is a basic concept in Islam. People worship Allah and are patient with the hardships of this world in order to gain reward. A Muslim abandons food and drink to fast for Allah Almighty. The Muslim leaves playing and prays to Allah Almighty whenever we hear the call to prayer. The Muslim abandons sleep and rest and prays to Allah Almighty. The beautiful reward of Allah includes His satisfaction with us, attaining closeness to Him and entering the highest paradise. Due to the harshness of Allah's punishment, people refrain from what Allah Almighty has prohibited. This is also to safeguard oneself from the displeasure of Allah Almighty. Now, my friends, who can answer this? Is the principle of reward and punishment important in raising children to obey Allah Almighty? That's right. Encouraging children to do what Allah Almighty loves is important because it helps them to continue doing good deeds. Likewise, holding children accountable if they commit sins that Allah has forbidden is an important and wise thing. Punishment helps children stay away from everything that Allah Almighty doesn't like, and He helps them abandon sins. So both reward and punishment are crucial for the upbringing of children to be balanced and righteous. Allah Almighty has commanded parents to raise their children in obedience to Him. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, Each of you is a shepherd, and each of you is responsible for his flock. So, my dears, parents obey Allah Almighty by raising their children to do everything that pleases Allah. This includes raising them in a balanced and righteous way, encouraging them to perform acts of worship and be obedient, instilling good morals in them, deterring them from committing sins, steering them away from practicing bad habits, and finally, instilling both the fear of Allah Almighty in them. Now, who can tell me what is required of us as righteous children to do for our fathers and mothers? Wonderful. We are obligated to obey our parents when they ask us to do anything that pleases Allah Almighty and bring us closer to Him. Our obedience to our parents in everything that Allah has commanded is also obedience to Allah Almighty. Allah Almighty said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. For your Lord has decreed that you worship none but Him and honor your parents. You should also know that our obedience to our children and mothers in everything that Allah has commanded is an act of kindness towards them. Allah Almighty has commanded us to show kindness to them. Not only we are commanded to be kind to them, we are also commanded to treat them with our very best behavior. So what have you all learned from today's lesson? Well done. Today we learned that the principle of reward and punishment is an important concept by which Allah Almighty nurtures His servants so they remain in His worship and on the path to paradise, and to ensure their salvation from hellfire. Reward and punishment are important for raising children because this is what souls are created with. Motivation and rewards are things that excite the soul and encourage it. Allah Almighty commanded parents to raise their children and raise them in a good upbringing. This includes encouraging children to obey Allah, deterring them from doing things that Allah Almighty prohibited, encouraging children to perform acts of worship, and giving them consequences to face if they do wrong. We have learned that children must obey their parents in everything Allah has commanded, because Allah Almighty commanded them to be obedient. Praise be to Allah Almighty who has blessed us with our parents and commanded them to raise us to do everything He loves and He is pleased with, and to abstain from everything He forbids. As a result, we grow accustomed to His worship and enter the paradise of Allah Almighty in peace. This concludes our lesson on reward and punishment. We will see you soon in another lesson, inshaAllah.